Hey math fans, we're on Factoring Quadratics, number 2. Let's get started. Before we look at how to factor trinomials, let's do a quick review of how to double distribute. So I have quantity of x plus 6 times the quantity of x plus 9. When we double distribute, we get 4 terms. Now, when we factor, we're going to be putting it back into the parentheses. So I want to really take a look at these 4 terms and then also review the grouping method. Like, let's take a look at the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. Do they have something in common? So we have x squared plus 6x plus 9x plus 54. The first 2 terms both have an x, which can be undistributed. We can factor out that GCF. And then we can also take out a 9 or divide by a 9, undistributed 9. And since both terms have x plus 6, we can now pull out or undistribute that x plus 6, and we have the x plus 9 in parentheses. So this is factoring by grouping. We look and see what do they have in common, the first 2 terms, the last 2 terms. So here's another one, m squared plus 14m plus 45. Now, before we get into the grouping, we have a couple things to consider. One, what is the value of a times c? Remember, the value of a is the number in front of the squared term. So notice there's no number in front of m squared. So it's just going to be 1 for a. And c is 45. So 45 times 1 is going to be 45. So we're going to multiply a times c, get 45. And then we're going to start asking ourselves, what adds to 14m but multiplies to 45? Because remember, when we were double distributing, that middle term was a combined like term. And so what adds to 14 and multiplies to 45? Let's see here. What are the factors of 45? Immediately, the first 2 numbers that come to my mind are 9 and 5. And doesn't 9 plus 5 also equal 14? So that one was kind of easy. You'll notice that some of the numbers get a little more tedious to try and work through all the factors that might add up to that middle term. But 9m plus 5m equals 14m. And now we can do the factor by grouping. What do the first 2 terms have in common? What do the last 2 terms have in common? And we'll notice that they both have an m plus 9 in the parentheses when you factor out the m from the first 2 and a 5 from the second 2. We continue with the grouping method. For our final factored quadratic, it'll be m plus 9 quantity times m plus 5. Now, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. It's a commutative property. In other words, if you put parentheses m plus 5 times parentheses m plus 9, it's exactly the same answer. All right, we're going to solve by factoring this one. So we have 6x squared minus 18x minus 168. The first thing we should always do is we should always set it equal to 0 and then ask ourselves, is there a greatest common factor in all 3 of them? I know we've been looking at factoring by grouping the first 2, the last 2, but in the very beginning, you should really go, hey, is there a common value in each one of these terms? And I notice they're all divisible by 6. So my very first move is to divide everything by 6 or undistribute the 6. And then I can proceed to do the method we just learned how to do. By the way, since it's equal to 0, couldn't we divide both sides by 6? And then you don't have to worry about that 6 anymore, and we can go ahead and just factor the x squared minus 3x minus 28. So I divided by 6. Now we got to ask ourselves, what's a times c? What is the value of a? Well, it's 1, right? And what is the value of c? It's negative 28. When we multiply them together, we get negative 28. So we got to ask ourselves, what 2 numbers multiply to negative 28 but add up to negative 3x? So what multiplies to negative 28 and adds to negative 3x? 28, I think of 7 and 4. And if we do maybe -7 and +4, wouldn't that get us the -3? So we have -7x and -4x. That will be our middle term. And now we can do the factoring by grouping. The first two terms have an x in common. The second two terms have a 4 in common. And your final answer will be, your final factored form will be quantity of x minus 7 times the quantity of x plus 4. But we're actually solving here. We're solving for x. As you can see, it's set equal to 0. So we have one more step, and that's to set each of the parentheses equal to 0. And when we do that, we get the solutions of x is equal to 7 and x is equal to -4. Why don't you practice factoring some of these quadratics on your own? Go ahead and pause the video, and we'll go through the answers one at a time. Here's the answer to the first one. The second one was just 2 terms, so all we needed to do was factor a GCF out. So you might get some of those on the practice worksheet. Number 3, quantity of k plus 5 times k plus 10. And then number 4, do they all have a greatest common factor? They do. So that 3 gets moved to the outside. And if we were solving, we would just divide by 3 and wouldn't necessarily even worry about it. But the factors are actually x plus 9 in parentheses and then x minus 10. Great job, everybody. Make sure you do the worksheet and show all your work. We'll see you in class.